dragon to... We're sticking with my plan. Whoa.
Long ago, the land of Kumandra was threatened by mysterious creatures called the Drone, shadowy forces that turned living beings into stone and spread destruction wherever they appeared. In the middle of the crisis, the last dragons gathered their magic to create a powerful gem capable of driving the Drone away. The dragons succeeded in saving humanity, but their sacrifice left only one dragon, Sisu, behind. The people who survived eventually divided Kumandra into 5 separate lands, each named after a part of the dragon-shaped region. Generations passed and the memory of the old unity slowly faded, leaving suspicion and rivalry between the different peoples. Raya grew up in the Hath region, where her father, Chief Benja, believed that the people of Kumandra could eventually overcome their differences and live together again. He taught Raya that the 5 lands were connected and that cooperation was stronger than division. However, the other regions remained suspicious of Heart because it protected the powerful dragon gem. Chief Benja eventually invited representatives from Fang, Spine, Talon, and Tail to a gathering at Heart, hoping food and friendship could convince them to trust one another. Raya was fascinated by the idea and carefully watched the visitors, especially Namari, a young warrior from Fang who shared her interest in dragons and appeared to understand her admiration for Sisu. Raya and Namari quickly formed a friendship based on their shared fascination with the legendary last dragon. Namari gave Raya a dragon pendant as a sign of friendship, and Raya trusted her enough to reveal the secret location of the dragon gem. Their connection seemed to prove Chief Benja's belief that people from different lands could become friends despite generations of conflict. However, the fragile peace did not last. The gathering turned into chaos when members of the different groups became suspicious of one another and began fighting over the gem. During the confusion, the precious object was broken and the Drone were released once again. The creatures immediately spread through Heart, turning people into stone as panic consumed the region. Chief Benja desperately tried to protect everyone, but the situation became impossible to control. Raya watched in horror as her father pushed her to safety and then became surrounded by the advancing Drone. He sacrificed himself so that she could survive, leaving Raya alone with the broken pieces of the dragon gem. The destruction changed her life completely. She blamed herself for trusting Namari and believed that the division between the people of Kumandra had caused the disaster. Determined to find a way to restore her father and everyone else who had been turned to stone, Raya began searching for the legendary Sisu. For years, Raya traveled across the ruined regions of Kumandra, following old stories and studying clues about the last dragon. She carried the remaining pieces of the gem and gradually learned that each fragment was connected to a different region. The journey was difficult because the drone continued spreading wherever people gathered without protection from the gem. Raya became cautious and independent, rarely trusting anyone she met. She survived by relying on her fighting skills, intelligence, and ability to recognize traps before they could close around her. Yet, beneath her hardened personality remained the same desire that had once inspired her father to restore the people of Kumandra and bring her family back. Raya eventually discovered an ancient location in the region of Tel where she believed Sisu could be summoned. Using the information she had gathered, she successfully called upon the last dragon. Instead of encountering a terrifying legendary creature, Raya found Sisu to be cheerful, curious, and surprisingly inexperienced with the modern world. Sisu explained that she had not personally defeated the drone. Instead, her siblings had combined their powers through the dragon gem, allowing humanity to survive. Raya realized that Sisu's role was connected to the gem itself, and that recovering all of its pieces might provide the only chance of reversing the destruction. Sisu agreed to help Raya recover the remaining pieces, believing that the people of Kumandra could be saved if they worked together. Raya remained uncertain because her experiences had taught her that trusting others could lead to disaster. Sisu, however, believed trust was exactly what had allowed the dragons to defeat the drone in the past. She explained that her siblings had trusted one another completely when they combined their magic. Raya understood the importance of the message, but struggled to accept it personally. Her father's death had convinced her that trusting someone could make her vulnerable, and she feared repeating the mistake that had destroyed Heart. The two began traveling together across Kumandra, searching for the remaining fragments of the gem. Raya discovered that Sisu's presence made the journey very different from the lonely years she had experienced before. Sisu was powerful in ways Raya did not always understand, but she was also playful and trusting towards strangers. Raya often worried that Sisu's openness would put them in danger. Sisu, meanwhile, believed that meeting people from different regions was an opportunity rather than a threat. Their opposing attitudes created tension, but they also began teaching one another. Raya learned that caution did not have to mean complete isolation, while Sisu slowly understood why the broken relationships of Kumandra made trust so difficult. Their first major stop was Talon, a crowded region built around water where Raya believed another fragment of the gem was being protected. Instead of confronting the local people directly, Raya used disguises and careful planning to move through the area. She was aware that other groups might also be searching for the gem pieces, and she did not want anyone to discover Sisu. Eventually, their search brought them into contact with a young child named Boone, who operated a small boat and restaurant. Boone had lost his family to the drone, but continued working alone. Despite Raya's initial suspicion, Sisu immediately treated him with kindness, and Boone soon became involved in their mission. Boone's boat gave the group a way to travel through Talon's waterways while avoiding some of the more dangerous areas. Raya remained cautious about allowing him to accompany them, but Sisu encouraged her to give him a chance. Boone was energetic, clever, and eager to prove that he could help. His presence gradually showed Raya that not everyone they encountered was secretly planning to betray them. Even though Boone had his own fears and weaknesses, he was willing to risk himself for people he had only recently met. Raya began seeing small examples of the trust Sisu had been describing, although she still refused to admit that her outlook might be changing. As they continued searching, Raya and Sisu learned that the remaining fragments were spread across the other regions of Kumandra. Each piece was guarded or controlled by people who had their own reasons for protecting it. The journey therefore required more than fighting. Raya needed to understand the people they encountered and find ways to work with them without allowing her caution to disappear completely. Sisu repeatedly reminded her that the original dragons had succeeded because they trusted one another. Raya remained unconvinced that humans could behave the same way, especially after witnessing how quickly the gathering at Heart had collapsed into violence. Meanwhile, Namari and the people of Fang were also searching for the gem fragments. Namari had grown into a skilled warrior and remained haunted by what happened at Heart. She believed Raya had betrayed her by taking the gem after the disaster, while Raya believed Namari's actions had caused her father's death. Neither woman fully understood the other's intentions, and their shared history had become a source of anger. Namari's determination to recover the gem brought her closer to Raya's path, making another confrontation increasingly likely. Their personal conflict reflected the larger division between the five lands, where old fears continued controlling people long after the original reasons for distrust had been forgotten. Raya and her growing group eventually continued toward another region, carrying the recovered gem fragment and hoping to find the next piece. Along the way, Raya began realizing that the mission was becoming larger than her original goal of restoring her father. Sisu believed every person they helped could become part of a new Kumandra, one where the regions did not automatically treat one another as enemies. Raya wanted to believe her, but the memory of Chief Benja remained painful. She knew that bringing everyone back would not matter if the people of Kumandra simply returned to the same mistrust that had caused the disaster in the first place. The journey now placed Raya in a position she had spent years avoiding. She could no longer succeed completely alone. Sisu, Baun, and the others depended on one another, and every new challenge required cooperation. Raya continued carrying her weapons and preparing for betrayal, but she also began allowing others to stand beside her. The change was gradual and uncomfortable, yet it represented the first step toward understanding her father's dream. The fragments of the dragon gem were scattered across a divided world, and the only way to reunite them was to bring together people who had been taught for generations to fear each other. As the group moved deeper into Kumandra, the threat of the drone remained constant. The creatures could return wherever the protective magic was absent, and every delay risked allowing more people to become stone. Raya knew that time was running out, but she also understood that rushing without trust could destroy their mission. Sisu continued encouraging her to believe in the people they met, while Raya remained determined to protect everyone through careful planning. Their journey had become a balance between faith and caution, with both approaches necessary to survive. Somewhere ahead waited more gem fragments, more allies, and more enemies. But Raya was beginning to understand that saving Kumandra would require something much greater than a single warrior. Raya and her companions continue traveling through Kumandra as they search for the remaining pieces of the dragon gem. Their journey takes them into dangerous territory, where the Drune have already destroyed entire communities, leaving behind silent streets and stone figures frozen in the moments before disaster. Sisu remains optimistic despite the destruction surrounding them, believing that the people of Kumandra can still learn to trust one another. Raya finds that belief difficult to accept, especially after everything that happened at Heart. Nevertheless, she begins recognizing that Sisu's attitude is not simple innocence. The dragon genuinely believes that cooperation is the only reason humanity survived the first Drune attack. The group eventually reaches Spine, a cold and mountainous region controlled by fierce warriors who are suspicious of outsiders. Raya knows they cannot simply walk into the territory and demand another gem fragment, so she prepares for a confrontation. Sisu, however, approaches the situation differently, hoping that kindness might prevent violence. Their conflicting strategies create tension, but both understand that they need the fragment protected somewhere within the region. Raya moves carefully through the dangerous landscape while watching for traps, knowing that Spine's warriors are experienced fighters. Every step reminds her that the regions of Kumandra have spent generations preparing to defend themselves against people they consider enemies. Their search brings them face to face with Tong, a massive warrior from Spine who initially appears to be a serious threat. Raya prepares herself for battle, expecting the encounter to become violent almost immediately. Instead, she discovers that Tong has his own tragic history. The Droon destroyed his community, leaving him alone in a land that was once filled with people. Sisu recognizes his loneliness and speaks to him with compassion rather than fear. Raya is surprised when Tong begins listening instead of attacking. His strength makes him valuable to the group, but his willingness to help also demonstrates another important lesson. Someone who appears frightening from a distance may be carrying pain that others cannot see. Tong eventually agrees to help Raya and Sisu recover the gem fragment protected within the region. His knowledge of Spine allows the group to travel through areas that would otherwise be extremely dangerous. Raya begins trusting him, although she still keeps her weapons close and watches everyone's movements carefully. Sisu remains delighted that another person has joined their mission, seeing each new companion as evidence that the divided regions can become united again. Baun is equally excited to have Tong aboard, while the enormous warrior slowly becomes comfortable with the group. Their unlikely friendship begins changing the atmosphere of the journey, replacing the isolation Raya had known for years with something resembling a family. As they leave Spine, Raya realizes that the group has become much larger than she originally planned. Boon, Tong, and Sisu each bring different strengths, and their personalities often clash in amusing ways. Raya remains the most cautious member, but she increasingly depends on the others during difficult situations. The group continues searching for the remaining gem pieces while avoiding the Droon and monitoring the movements of Fang. Raya knows that Namari and her warriors are still looking for them, and the possibility of another confrontation remains constantly in her thoughts. She wants to avoid Namari, but part of her also knows that the conflict between them cannot remain unresolved forever. Their next journey leads them toward Fang, the most technologically advanced and heavily protected region of Kumandra. Raya knows that entering Fang will be more difficult than traveling through the other lands because Namari's people are organized, disciplined, and well equipped. The region is surrounded by water, making its defenses difficult to bypass. Raya studies the area carefully and searches for a way to reach the gem fragment without immediately attracting attention. Sisu remains convinced that Namari may not be as dangerous as Raya believes. Raya refuses to accept that possibility, remembering the broken trust that led to her father's death and the release of the Droon. Namari, meanwhile, continues struggling with her own feelings about Raya. She remembers the friendship they once shared and the moment everything changed at heart. Her mother, Chief Virana, expects her to protect Fang and recover the dragon gem at any cost. Namari has been raised to believe that the other regions cannot be trusted, yet her memories of Raya make that belief increasingly difficult to maintain. She keeps the dragon pendant Raya once gave her, suggesting that the friendship they shared was never completely erased. Her loyalty to Fang conflicts with her personal feelings, leaving her caught between the expectations of her mother and the possibility that Raya may not be the enemy she has always believed her to be. Raya's group eventually enters Fang's territory and attempts to recover the final pieces without creating unnecessary conflict. However, their presence is discovered, forcing Raya to confront Namari again. The two women immediately fall back into old patterns, blaming each other for the tragedy at heart. Their conversation becomes tense because both believe they were betrayed. Raya sees Namari as the person who caused her father's death, while Namari believes Raya abandoned their friendship and took the gem after everything went wrong. Neither woman is ready to listen carefully enough to understand the other, Their personal anger mirrors the larger hatred between Fang and the other regions, making reconciliation extremely difficult. Sisu tries to convince Raya that Namari can still be trusted, but Raya refuses to take the risk. She believes that allowing herself to trust Namari again could endanger everyone in the group. Sisu argues that trust requires vulnerability and that Kumandra cannot be saved if everyone waits for someone else to make the first move. Raya understands the logic but remains emotionally trapped by her past. She has spent years believing that trust is weakness, and changing that belief is harder than defeating any enemy. The group continues moving through Fang while the tension between Raya and Namari grows, bringing them closer to another confrontation. Boon and Tong begin understanding why Raya has such difficulty trusting people. They realize that her caution is not simply a personality trait but the result of years spent blaming herself for what happened at heart. Rather than criticizing her, they remain beside her and continue helping with the mission. Their support gives Raya a sense of security she has not experienced since losing her father. Even though she still fears betrayal, she begins understanding that trusting someone does not mean surrendering all caution. It can mean allowing another person to prove through actions that they deserve confidence. This realization becomes increasingly important as the group approaches the most dangerous stage of their journey. The search for the gem fragments becomes more urgent when the drone begins spreading again through areas where their magical protection is weak. People flee from the creatures as stone spreads across villages and roads. Raya realizes that every argument and every delay gives the drone more time to destroy what remains of Kumandra. Sisu reminds her that the dragons sacrificed themselves to save humanity, and their final act depended upon cooperation. Raya finally begins accepting that the answer may not be another weapon or clever strategy. The key to saving everyone could be the same thing she has feared most since childhood: trusting people who once seemed like enemies. Namari's situation becomes more complicated when she begins questioning her mother's decisions. Chief Virana remains determined to keep Fang isolated and protected, believing that cooperation with the other regions could weaken her people. Namari understands her mother's fears but also recognizes that the drone threat cannot be contained by one region forever. She wants to protect Fang, yet she increasingly believes that Raya's mission may be the only chance of restoring Kumandra. Her internal conflict reaches a dangerous point when she realizes that following orders could put Sisu and the entire group in greater danger. For the first time, Namari must decide whether loyalty means obeying authority or choosing what she believes is morally right. Raya and her companions eventually gather more pieces of the dragon gem, but their progress comes at a cost. Every fragment increases their ability to resist the drone, yet bringing the pieces together also makes them a larger target for anyone who wants control of the gem. Raya knows that the final confrontation is approaching. She watches Sisu carefully and begins understanding how much the dragon means to everyone involved. Sisu represents hope to people who have almost forgotten what unity feels like. Protecting her becomes just as important as recovering the gem, because without Sisu's magic and guidance, the fragments may never be powerful enough to reverse the destruction. The group prepares to move toward the final location where the remaining fragment can be found. Raya knows Namari will likely be there, and she fears that another confrontation could destroy everything they have accomplished. Bon and Tong remain ready to support her, while Sisu continues insisting that there must be a way to solve the conflict without fighting. Raya wants to believe her, but years of experience tell her that enemies often use kindness as an opportunity to strike. The difference between them becomes clear. Sisu believes trust creates possibilities, while Raya believes trust creates openings for betrayal. Their opposing beliefs are about to be tested by the most dangerous moment of the journey. As the group prepares for the next stage, Raya looks across the divided lands of Kumandra and remembers her father's dream of bringing everyone together. She once believed that dream had died with him, but the people now traveling beside her have slowly changed that belief. Bone, Tong, and Sisu were strangers who became companions because they chose to help one another. Even Namari, despite their painful history, may still have the ability to change. Raya cannot yet fully trust her, but she begins wondering whether forgiveness might be possible. The final gem pieces are within reach, and with them comes the possibility of restoring everyone who was turned to stone. The journey has brought Raya closer to the truth about what happened at heart. She now understands that the disaster was not caused by one person's actions alone. Fear, suspicion, pride, and the refusal to trust created the conditions that allowed everything to collapse. Namari made mistakes, but so did Raya, and the leaders of every region carried responsibility for the division that had existed for generations. Accepting this truth is painful because it means Raya can no longer place all the blame on one person. Yet it also gives her hope. If the disaster was created by division, perhaps it can be reversed through cooperation. The final challenge will determine whether Raya is ready to believe that possibility. With the remaining journey ahead of them, the group moves forward together while the threat of the drone grows stronger. The gem fragments are close to being reunited, but the people carrying them remain divided by old wounds. Raya understands that defeating the drone will require more than recovering magical pieces. Someone must be willing to take the first step and trust the others completely. She does not know whether she is ready for that responsibility, but she can no longer ignore what Sisu has taught her. The fate of Kumandra now depends upon whether people who have spent generations fearing one another can finally choose cooperation over suspicion when everything they love is at risk. Raya and her companions continue toward the final pieces of the dragon gem, but the journey becomes increasingly dangerous as the drones spread through Kumandra. Villages that once survived behind protective barriers are suddenly threatened, forcing families to flee while warriors attempt to hold the creatures back. Sisu remains determined to believe that the people of every region can work together, while Raya becomes increasingly aware that the time for hesitation is disappearing. Bound and Tong stay close to them, ready to help whenever danger appears. Their growing friendship gives Raya confidence, but she still carries the painful memory of her father's death and the fear that trusting someone again could lead to another terrible loss. The group eventually discovers that the remaining gem fragments are being closely guarded by Fang, making their mission more difficult than ever. Raya knows that Namari and her warriors will not simply hand over the pieces, especially because Fang's leaders believe keeping the gem under their control is the safest way to protect their people. Raya attempts to find another way into the region, but every possible route appears heavily watched. Sisu encourages her to approach Namari directly, believing that the two of them can finally resolve the misunderstanding that has divided them. Raya remains reluctant, remembering how quickly their childhood friendship turned into tragedy when the gem was broken. Namari is struggling with her own doubts as she watches the situation worsen around Fang. Her mother continues insisting that the region must protect itself above everything else. But Namari understands that the drone do not care about political boundaries. The creatures are spreading beyond the territories where they first appeared, and Fang's defenses cannot stop them forever. She thinks about Sisu and remembers the stories her mother once told her about the dragons. Although she has spent years blaming Raya for what happened at heart, she begins realizing that their shared history may have been based on fear and misunderstanding rather than true betrayal. Her uncertainty makes her vulnerable to pressure from both sides. Raya finally approaches Namari, hoping to settle their conflict long enough to recover the gem pieces. Their conversation begins carefully, with both women refusing to lower their guard. Raya explains that the Droon are returning and that the only chance of stopping them is to reunite the gem. Namari understands the danger but remains worried about what will happen if Fang gives up its remaining protection. She has been taught that trusting outsiders could expose her people to destruction, while Raya has learned almost the opposite lesson through her travels. Their conversation reveals that both women have been shaped by the same fear. Neither wants to repeat the disaster at heart, yet neither knows how to break the cycle. Sisu steps between them and tries to remind them that the dragons once trusted one another enough to sacrifice everything for humanity. Her words make Raya hesitate, but Namari also begins questioning the assumptions she has carried for years. The moment could have become the beginning of peace, but fear quickly returns when the surrounding situation becomes unstable. Weapons are raised, people become suspicious, and the fragile understanding begins to disappear. Raya reacts instinctively, believing that Namari is about to betray them. Namari makes a similar assumption about Raya. Once again, the two women allow fear to control their actions, proving how difficult it is to break habits created by generations of conflict. The confrontation becomes chaotic as the different groups struggle to protect themselves. Raya tries to keep Sisu safe while Boone and Tom attempt to hold back the growing danger. Namari is caught between protecting Fang and helping the people she once considered enemies. In the confusion, Sisu is placed in serious danger, forcing Raya to make an immediate decision. She has only seconds to choose between trusting Namari or relying entirely on herself. The memory of her father's final moments returns, reminding her of the consequences of trusting someone. Yet, Sisu's belief in her continues influencing Raya, even though she has not fully accepted the lesson. The situation becomes even worse when the protective power of the gem weakens. The drone begins spreading through the surrounding area, turning people into stone as they attempt to escape. Raya realizes that the arguments between the regions are meaningless if everyone is destroyed. She desperately searches for a way to reunite the fragments, but the people around her remain divided. Sisu continues encouraging cooperation, insisting that the gem's power depends upon more than the physical pieces. Raya finally begins understanding that the dragons did not simply create a magical weapon. They created a symbol of trust, and its true strength came from people believing enough in one another to place their lives in someone else's hands. Namari eventually realizes that Raya is not trying to control the gem for herself. She sees that Raya's goal has always been to restore the people who were turned to stone and bring her father back. This realization changes the way she sees their past. Namari remembers the friendship they once shared and recognizes that neither of them understood what would happen when they met at heart. Her guilt becomes overwhelming, but she also understands that remaining trapped in that guilt will not save anyone. She must decide whether to continue protecting Fang through isolation or risk everything by helping Raya reunite the gem and stop the drone. Raya also begins accepting responsibility for her own mistakes. For years, she blamed Namari for the destruction of Heart because doing so gave her a clear enemy to hate. Now she recognizes that the situation was more complicated. The gathering had already been filled with suspicion, and everyone arrived expecting betrayal. Her own decision to reveal the location of the gem had been made because she wanted friendship, but she had not considered how dangerous the situation could become. Accepting responsibility does not erase the pain of losing her father, but it allows Raya to move beyond the anger that has controlled her life. She finally understands that forgiveness may be necessary to save Kumandra. The remaining members of Raya's group continue helping wherever they can. Boone uses his knowledge of the waterways to move people away from areas threatened by the drone, while Tong protects those who cannot escape quickly. Their actions demonstrate that courage is not limited to warriors or legendary heroes. Ordinary people can make extraordinary choices when they decide to protect others. Raya watches them and realizes that Sisu's belief in people was not foolish after all. Every person who chooses to help another creates a small connection across the divisions of Kumandra. Those connections may eventually become strong enough to overcome the fear that has separated the regions for generations. As the drone advances, Raya and Namari finally begin working together. Their cooperation is awkward because neither has completely forgotten the past, but they understand that survival requires them to move forward. They combine their knowledge of the different regions and begin searching for a way to bring the gem fragments together. Raya's fighting skills and Namari's knowledge of Fang's defenses complement one another, making them stronger as a team than either expected. Their partnership also gives Boone and Tong hope that the people of Kumandra can change. For the first time, two former enemies are actively choosing cooperation instead of allowing old anger to dictate their actions. The journey toward the final gathering point becomes a desperate race against time. The drone have already destroyed much of the remaining population and the protective areas are shrinking. Raya carries the gem fragments carefully, knowing that losing even one could make their entire effort fail. Namari stays beside her, determined to prove that she can be trusted. Their relationship remains complicated, but every step they take together weakens the old hatred between them. Raya begins to understand that trust is not something given because another person has earned perfection. Sometimes trust is a decision made because the alternative is allowing fear to destroy everyone. She is finally ready to take that risk. The group reaches the place where the final pieces can be reunited, but the situation is far from safe. The drones surround the area, leaving almost no room for escape. Raya realizes that they have reached the moment her father dreamed about years earlier. The moment when people from every region must choose whether to stand together. The difference is that nobody has a perfect plan anymore. Their weapons and skills can protect them temporarily, but the gem cannot restore Kumandra unless they trust one another completely. Raya looks at the people beside her and understands that the final challenge is not defeating an enemy. It is overcoming the fear inside themselves. Namari takes a step forward and offers the final piece of the gem. Raya immediately understands the significance of the gesture. Namari is placing her trust in the same person she once believed had betrayed her, while Raya must decide whether to accept that trust. The choice is terrifying because the consequences of failure are enormous. Yet, Raya remembers Sisu's belief in people and her father's teachings about unity. Instead of allowing suspicion to control her, Raya accepts Namari's decision. The two women finally stop fighting against the past and begin working toward the future. Their choice creates the possibility that the gem can once again become whole. The pieces are brought together, but the danger surrounding them continues growing. The drone move closer while the group struggles to maintain their position. Raya realizes that the gem alone may not be enough. The original dragons succeeded because they trusted one another completely. And now, humans must make the same sacrifice. Each member of the group begins understanding that someone may have to risk everything for the others. The fear that once kept them divided now becomes the very thing they must overcome. Raya knows there is no guarantee that their plan will work, but for the first time, she believes that trusting others is worth the risk, even when failure could cost her everything. Namari proves her commitment by standing with Raya when the danger becomes overwhelming. She no longer cares about protecting only Fang or following the expectations placed upon her by her mother. She understands that saving Kumandra requires protecting people from every region. Raya sees the change and recognizes that the person she once trusted as a child has finally returned beneath years of fear and responsibility. Their friendship cannot simply return to what it was before heart, because too much has happened between them. Instead, something new begins to form, a partnership built on honesty, forgiveness, and shared responsibility. Both women finally accept that their mistakes do not have to determine the future. The others follow their example and begin placing their trust in one another. Boone, Tong, and the remaining companions each make decisions that put the group ahead of their own safety. Their actions reflect the sacrifice made by the dragons long ago and demonstrate why Sisu always believed humanity could be better than its history suggested. Raya watches as people who once had every reason to remain divided now stand together against the same threat. The transformation is remarkable because nothing magical has forced them to cooperate. They are choosing it themselves. That choice gives the final pieces of the gem a meaning far greater than their physical power. The drone continue closing in, but Raya no longer faces them as a frightened girl carrying the burden of a father's death. She stands as someone who has learned that strength can come from other people. Her journey across Kumandra has changed her understanding of trust, friendship, and responsibility. She still remembers the pain caused by Namari's actions, but she no longer allows that pain to determine every decision. The future of Kumandra depends on everyone being willing to let go of old hatred. Raya finally accepts that she cannot save the world alone. She can only create the opportunity for others to stand beside her. And now they are ready to do exactly that. With the final decision approaching, the people of Kumandra prepare to face the drone together. Raya knows that the outcome will determine whether the world they remember can be restored or whether the destruction will become permanent. Sisu's faith in humanity has brought them this far, but now the humans must demonstrate that they deserve that faith. Raya looks toward her companions and understands the true lesson of her father's dream. Unity does not mean forgetting differences or pretending that betrayal never happened. It means choosing to trust one another despite those differences. As the darkness surrounds them, Raya takes her place among the others, ready to risk everything for the future of Kumandra. The final confrontation begins as the drones surround Raya, Namari, and their companions from every direction. The creatures move through the ruined landscape like a living shadow, consuming everything they touch and leaving stone figures behind them. Raya understands that there is almost no time left to hesitate. The dragon gem has been gathered, but its power cannot be restored through force alone. The people standing beside her must trust one another completely, just as Sisu's siblings trusted one another when they sacrificed themselves centuries earlier. Raya looks at the frightened faces around her and realizes that the final battle will be won through courage, cooperation, and the willingness to place someone else's life before her own. Namari remains close to Raya while the others prepare to defend the group. She knows that her actions at heart help create the circumstances that release the drone, and the guilt has followed her ever since. Yet, Raya no longer sees her only as the person responsible for destroying her family. She understands that Namari was also shaped by fear, expectations, and the belief that protecting her own people required keeping everyone else at a distance. Their painful history cannot be erased, but they can choose what happens next. Namari offers her support without demanding forgiveness, and Raya accepts it because she finally understands that trust is not about pretending someone never made mistakes. The group begins moving through the devastated area in search of a safe position where the gem fragments can be combined. Every route appears dangerous, with the drone advancing from multiple directions and leaving fewer places where people can hide. Boone uses his experience navigating difficult terrain to guide them through narrow passages, while Tong protects anyone who becomes separated from the group. Raya remains focused on the gem, carrying it carefully because she knows that losing even one fragment could destroy their final chance. The group moves together despite their differences, and their cooperation becomes more natural than it was earlier in the journey. They are no longer strangers traveling toward the same goal, they have become a team. As the drone continue advancing, Raya realizes that the group must make a choice that could cost them everything. The gem's power was created through the combined trust of Sisu's siblings, and the same principle now appears to be necessary for humans. Nobody can simply stand aside and expect someone else to take the risk. Raya remembers her father's belief that the people of Kumandra could become united again, even though the world around him seemed determined to prove him wrong. For years, she believed his dream had died with him. Now, surrounded by people from different regions who have chosen to stand together, she begins seeing that his dream may finally have a chance to become reality. The first sacrifice comes when one member of the group steps forward and places complete trust in the others. The decision is frightening because there is no certainty that the plan will work. Raya watches carefully, realizing that everyone must follow the same path if they want the gem to regain its full power. The others hesitate for only a moment before understanding what must be done. Their actions are not driven by confidence that they will survive. They are driven by confidence in one another. This distinction is what Raya struggled to understand throughout her journey. Trust does not guarantee safety. It means choosing to believe someone even when the outcome cannot be guaranteed. One by one, the members of the group make their choices, putting the lives of others before their own. Raya sees the same spirit that once existed among Sisu and her siblings. The people of Kumandra have spent generations believing that survival required protecting only their own communities. But now they are discovering that true survival depends upon protecting everyone. Their willingness to sacrifice weakens the fear that has divided them. The gem begins responding to their unity, and a faint light appears within the fragments. Raya realizes that the ancient magic is returning because the people carrying it have finally understood its purpose. The gem was never simply a weapon. It was a symbol of trust, made powerful by those willing to believe in one another. Namari watches the transformation with tears in her eyes because she finally understands what Sisu's family sacrificed long ago. She thinks about Fang and the people she has spent her entire life trying to protect. She realizes that protecting them does not mean keeping everyone else outside the walls. If the drone continues spreading, there will be no safe region left. Her mother had taught her that strength came from isolation, but the evidence before her proves something different. Namari chooses to stand with Raya because she believes that unity is now the only way to save Fang and every other region. Her decision represents a complete break from the fear that once controlled her. Raya finally confronts the deepest fear she has carried since childhood. She knows that trusting Namari completely is the most difficult decision she has ever made. The memory of the broken gem and her father's sacrifice remains vivid, but Raya now understands that holding on to anger will not bring him back. She chooses to trust Namari not because the past has become unimportant, but because the future is more important than continuing the same cycle of suspicion. The moment Raya lowers her guard, the others understand what she has chosen. Their trust becomes complete, and the power of the reunited gem begins growing stronger as the drone close in around them. The restored power spreads outward through the surrounding area, pushing back the darkness that has covered Kumandra for years. The drone begin weakening as the dragon magic returns, but the process requires the group to remain united. Raya watches the light move through the broken landscape and sees stone figures beginning to change. People who had been frozen for years are finally given the possibility of returning. The sight overwhelms her because she knows her father could be among them. Yet, she does not allow herself to celebrate too early. The magic is still fragile, and everyone must continue trusting one another until the final traces of the drone are driven away. Sisu's presence becomes especially important during the restoration. Although she had always believed that humans could learn to trust one another, even she could not have known exactly how powerful their decision would become. She watches Raya and Namari stand together and recognizes that the future of Kumandra may finally be different from its past. Sisu's optimism was never about ignoring danger. She understood that fear was real, but believed people could choose not to let fear control them. Now that belief is becoming reality. The dragon gem shines brighter as the combined trust of the group strengthens its power, pushing the darkness farther away from the regions that have suffered for so long. The drone begin disappearing as the dragon magic reaches farther across Kumandra. Their shadows dissolve from the streets, mountains, rivers, and ruined villages where they had spread. People who had been turned to stone begin returning to life, confused but alive. Families recognize one another after years of separation, while survivors search desperately for loved ones who disappeared when the drone first returned. Raya looks around in disbelief as the world she thought was permanently destroyed begins coming back. The sight is especially meaningful because she remembers believing that her father's sacrifice had been the end of her family. Now, there is a chance that everything she lost may finally be restored. Raya's thoughts immediately turn toward Chief Benja. She remembers his teachings about Kumandra and the way he believed the 5 regions could become one people again. For years, she carried the guilt of failing to protect him and blamed herself for trusting the wrong person. Now, she realizes that his greatest lesson was not about avoiding betrayal. It was about refusing to allow fear to destroy the possibility of friendship. Raya finally understands what he wanted her to become. He wanted her to be someone capable of bringing people together even when they had every reason to remain divided. The realization gives her a sense of peace she has not felt since the night heart was destroyed. Namari also searches among the returning people, hoping to see members of her own family and community restored. She knows that the choices she made could have cost everything. But she also understands that protecting Fang required accepting help from people she once considered enemies. Her relationship with Raya has changed permanently. They cannot erase what happened between them, but they can acknowledge it and move forward. Their friendship now carries greater weight because it has survived betrayal, grief, anger, and fear. Namari recognizes that trust is not something earned once and kept forever. It must be maintained through choices, and she is prepared to continue proving that she can be trusted. Boone is overwhelmed when the people he lost begin returning. He had spent years operating his boat and restaurant alone after the drone destroyed his family. He had learned to survive without expecting anyone to come back. Seeing familiar faces alive again changes everything. Tong experiences a similar emotional moment as people from Spine return, reminding him that the loneliness he accepted as permanent may finally be ending. Their reactions show Raya the personal meaning behind the mission. Restoring Kumandra is not simply about repairing a magical object or defeating a supernatural threat. It means giving countless people the opportunity to recover families, homes, and futures that they believed had been lost forever. Across the 5 regions, people begin emerging from their stone forms and discovering that the drone threat has disappeared. The divisions between the lands remain, but something fundamental has changed. Everyone has witnessed the power created when people from different communities trust one another. The old stories about the dragons no longer seem like distant legends. Their sacrifice has become a living example of what humanity can accomplish when fear is replaced by cooperation. Leaders and ordinary citizens alike begin reconsidering the beliefs that kept Kumandra divided. The restoration does not instantly erase centuries of suspicion, but it gives everyone a reason to believe that unity is possible. Raya eventually finds her father among those restored from stone. The moment is deeply emotional because she had spent years believing she would never see him again. Chief Benja recognizes his daughter and realizes how much she has changed. Raya does not need to explain every detail of her journey because her expression tells him that she has finally understood the lesson he tried to teach her. She introduces him to Sisu and the companions who helped her along the way. Benja sees people from different regions standing together and realizes that the dream he once considered possible has become reality. Raya has not only saved him, she has helped reunite Kumandra. Chief Benja embraces Raya and reminds her that trust was always worth the risk. She finally understands that his belief in unity was never naive. He knew people would make mistakes, hurt one another, and struggle to overcome fear, but he believed they could choose something better. Raya's journey proved that lesson. She began alone, convinced that depending on others was dangerous, and ended surrounded by people who had willingly risked everything for one another. Her father is proud of the person she became, and Raya realizes that the greatest way to honor him is not by continuing to fight his enemies, but by continuing the work of bringing people together. The reunited group returns to the center of Kumandra as people from all 5 regions begin gathering. The old divisions remain visible, but the atmosphere has changed. Instead of approaching one another with weapons ready, people begin sharing stories and recognizing how much they have in common. Sisu is welcomed by those who once knew dragons only through legends. Baun, Tong, and Namari stand beside Raya, representing different regions that had once been separated by fear. Their presence sends a powerful message to everyone watching. Kumandra is no longer simply a collection of rival lands. It has the opportunity to become the united world that Chief Benja imagined. Raya looks across the people gathered around her and remembers how the journey began. She had been a lonely warrior, searching for a dragon because she believed only magic could restore what she had lost. Instead, she discovered that the true power of the dragon gem came from trust. Sisu helped her understand that lesson, while Boon, Tong, and Namari showed her what trust looked like through their actions. Raya's greatest victory was therefore not defeating the drone. It was overcoming the fear that had controlled her since childhood. She finally understands that protecting people does not always mean standing in front of them alone. Sometimes it means standing beside them and believing they will stand beside you. The people of Kumandra begin rebuilding their homes and communities. But this time they do so with a greater understanding of their shared history. The 5 regions remain unique with different traditions, environments, and ways of life. Yet, those differences no longer need to create enemies. The destruction caused by the drone has shown everyone what happens when fear becomes stronger than trust. The memory of the dragons becomes a reminder that cooperation is not weakness. It is the foundation that allowed humanity to survive. Raya carries that lesson forward, determined to help ensure that future generations do not repeat the mistakes that nearly destroyed their world. Raya's journey has finally come full circle. She began as a child who believed friendship could save the world, only to watch that belief collapse when the gem was broken and her father was lost. She spent years alone, protecting herself from the possibility of betrayal. Meeting Sisu forced her to question those beliefs, while traveling with Boon and Tong showed her that trust could grow between complete strangers. Reconnecting with Namari challenged her more than any physical battle because forgiveness required her to confront her own pain. By choosing trust when it mattered most, Raya helped restore not only the dragon gem but the hope of an entire civilization. As peace begins returning to Kumandra, Sisu remains close to Raya and the others. Her cheerful personality has not changed, but she now carries a deeper understanding of what humanity can accomplish. The people who once feared dragons begin celebrating them again, not simply as magical creatures, but as symbols of sacrifice and unity. Raya knows that the work is not finished. Rebuilding trust between the regions will take time, and old habits may return if people forget the lessons of the past. Still, she is no longer afraid of that possibility. She has learned that trust must be practiced repeatedly, and she is ready to help guide Kumandra toward a future where cooperation becomes stronger than fear. The story of the drone becomes a lesson passed from one generation to another, but the people of Kumandra now remember more than the destruction. They remember how unity defeated something that seemed impossible to overcome. They remember that the dragon gem became powerful because individuals trusted one another enough to sacrifice for the greater good. Raya's experience becomes part of that history, not because she was the strongest warrior, but because she eventually found the courage to trust when distrust would have been easier. Her father returns home, Sisu survives, and the people, once divided by fear, now have the chance to build something new together. Raya stands with her family and friends as the people of Kumandra begin celebrating their survival. The world around her is no longer the broken landscape she remembers from childhood. It is still imperfect and rebuilding will take years, but the future finally feels possible. Raya knows that the scars of the past will never disappear completely, nor should they. They will remind everyone what happens when fear replaces trust. Yet, those scars can also become reminders of how people overcame their differences. Raya smiles as she looks toward the people gathered together, knowing that the promise her father made long ago has finally begun to come true. With the drone finally defeated and the people of Kumandra restored, the 5 regions begin facing the enormous task of rebuilding what was destroyed. Villages that had remained empty for years slowly become active again as families return to their homes and communities. Roads are cleared, damaged buildings are repaired, and people begin searching for belongings that survived the destruction. Raya watches these changes with a mixture of happiness and responsibility. She knows that restoring the physical world will be difficult, but rebuilding trust between the different regions may be even harder. The old divisions did not disappear simply because the Drun were defeated. They must now choose whether to continue living separately or create the united Kumandra her father always imagined. Chief Benja becomes an important voice during the rebuilding process because his belief in unity has finally been proven possible. Leaders from the different regions gather to discuss how they can cooperate without allowing old rivalries to return. Benja encourages them to remember that every region suffered when the drone returned, regardless of its political strength or location. The disaster showed that no community could protect itself forever by remaining isolated. Raya listens carefully as her father speaks, realizing how much she once misunderstood his optimism. She had believed he was simply dreaming about something impossible, but now she understands that his dream was a challenge. He wanted people to believe that their differences did not have to determine their future. Namari also faces the difficult responsibility of helping Fang change its relationship with the other regions. Her mother had spent years teaching her that isolation was the safest way to protect their people. But the events surrounding the drone proved that approach could not continue forever. Namari now has to earn the trust of people who remember Fang's previous actions and may still blame her for what happened at heart. She accepts that rebuilding relationships will require patience. Instead of demanding forgiveness, she chooses to demonstrate through her actions that Fang can become a partner rather than a rival. Raya supports her because she understands that trust cannot be forced. It must be built gradually through honest choices and shared responsibilities. Sisu becomes a symbol of hope throughout the rebuilding of Kumandra. People who had only heard stories about dragons now have the opportunity to meet the last surviving dragon and learn about the sacrifice made by her siblings. Sisu does not see herself as a ruler or hero, but her presence reminds everyone that the old divisions between humans were never as important as they believed. Children become specially fascinated by her stories, asking questions about the dragons and the world before the drone. Sisu enjoys answering them, often turning serious history into cheerful lessons. Her ability to make people smile helps create a new atmosphere in Kumandra where curiosity begins replacing suspicion. Boone returns to his restaurant and begins rebuilding it with the help of people from different regions. His experience during the journey has changed his understanding of family and friendship. Before meeting Raya and Sisu, he had learned to survive alone after losing the people he loved. Now he has a much larger group of friends who continue visiting him and helping whenever he needs support. His restaurant becomes more than a place to eat. It becomes a meeting point where people from different regions can sit together and share stories. Boone realizes that food can accomplish something weapons never could. It can bring strangers together without asking them to forget where they came from. Tong also returns to Spine where he discovers that the region is slowly coming back to life. People who had been turned to stone are reunited with family members they believed were gone forever. Tong's enormous strength makes him useful during reconstruction, but his kindness becomes just as important. He helps move heavy materials, repairs damaged structures, and encourages people who remain frightened by memories of the drone. His experience of loneliness has given him a deep appreciation for community. He does not want anyone else to believe they have to survive completely alone. His friendship with Raya, Boone, and Sisu remains strong, proving that people from completely different backgrounds can become a genuine family when they choose to support one another. Raya spends much of her time traveling between the regions, helping maintain the new connections that have begun forming. She understands that peace cannot be created through one celebration or one agreement. The people of Kumandra need regular opportunities to cooperate so that trust becomes part of everyday life rather than something remembered only during a crisis. Raya works with her father and the other leaders to organize meetings, exchanges, and shared projects. Each successful collaboration becomes another small step toward unity. She sometimes remembers the lonely warrior she used to be and finds it difficult to believe how much she has changed. Her greatest strength is no longer simply her ability to fight. It is her willingness to trust. Namari eventually visits Hart, returning to the place where her relationship with Raya was first destroyed. The location carries painful memories for both of them, but this time they enter it together without weapons drawn. Namari apologizes for the role she played in the events that released the drone, while Raya admits that she also made choices based on fear and anger. Neither expects the other to forget the past. Instead, they agree that remembering what happened can help prevent them from repeating it. Their conversation represents a major step forward because they no longer need to define themselves as enemies. They can acknowledge their mistakes while still choosing to build a friendship based on honesty. Chief Benja is proud to see Raya and Namari working together. He remembers the first time they met and how quickly their friendship became complicated by the divisions surrounding them. Now he sees the same two young women helping unite the people who once stood against each other. Benja understands that reconciliation will not always be easy, but he believes their example can inspire others. Raya realizes that her father's dream did not require everyone to become identical. Kumandra can remain diverse while still being united by shared responsibility. The regions can keep their own traditions and identities while recognizing that the survival of one community is connected to the survival of all the others. As the months pass, the restored communities begin developing new traditions that celebrate the unity of Kumandra. People organize gatherings where different regions exchange food, music, stories, and crafts. Children grow up seeing people from other lands as neighbors rather than enemies. Raya notices that these small changes may be more important than any official agreement between leaders. A political promise can be forgotten, but friendships formed between ordinary people can continue for generations. Sisu encourages these gatherings and often becomes the center of attention wherever she goes. Her presence reminds everyone of the sacrifices made by the dragons and the responsibility humans now have to protect the unity they nearly lost. The memory of the drone remains painful for many survivors, and not everyone immediately accepts the new approach. Some older people still believe the regions should remain separate because they remember the conflicts that existed before the disaster. Raya understands their hesitation because she once shared the same fear. She does not force them to change their minds. Instead, she encourages them to watch how cooperation improves their communities. When people from different regions help repair roads, share resources, or protect villages together, the benefits become difficult to deny. Slowly, even the most skeptical survivors begin recognizing that unity does not make them weaker. It gives them more people to rely on when unexpected challenges appear. Raya continues training with her sword, but her approach to fighting has changed. She no longer sees every unfamiliar person as a potential enemy. Her skills remain important because Kumandra still needs people capable of defending its communities. But Raya now understands that the best victory is often the one that prevents a fight from happening. She teaches younger warriors that strength should be used responsibly and that courage includes knowing when to lower a weapon. Some students struggle with the idea at first because they grew up hearing stories about rivalry between the regions. Raya patiently explains that the future cannot be built with the same fear that destroyed the past. Her lessons become another part of Kumandra's gradual transformation. Namari experiences similar changes within Fang. She works with her mother and other leaders to create new agreements with the neighboring regions. Fang begins sharing resources and knowledge instead of guarding everything for itself. Some people resist the changes, fearing that cooperation will expose them to betrayal. But Namari remains patient. She knows that she once felt exactly the same way. Her own transformation gives her the credibility to speak to people who are afraid. She tells them that trust does not mean ignoring danger, it means refusing to let fear make every decision. Her message slowly gains support as Fang sees practical benefits from working with the other regions rather than remaining isolated behind its defenses. Raya occasionally returns to the places where she traveled during her search for Sisu. She notices how different they look now that people have returned. Talon is busy again, Spine is rebuilding its communities, and Fang is opening its borders more than before. The journey that once represented desperation has become a reminder of how much Kumandra has changed. Raya remembers meeting Boon, Tong, and Namari under circumstances where she trusted almost nobody. Now those same people are among her closest friends. The memories make her appreciate how unlikely their transformation was. None of them planned to become part of a new united Kumandra. They simply made one good choice after another until those choices changed everything. Sisu continues teaching Raya that trust requires constant effort. She reminds her that even after the Drun are gone, people can still hurt one another through jealousy, misunderstanding, or fear. Raya understands that defeating the supernatural threat was only one part of the journey. The deeper challenge is preventing humans from creating another crisis through division. She promises Sisu that she will continue helping people communicate when disagreements arise. Sisu smiles because she knows Raya has finally become the person her father hoped she would be. Raya is no longer simply a warrior protecting a gem. She has become someone capable of protecting relationships, which may be an even greater responsibility. Boon, Tong, and Raya remain close despite living in different regions. Whenever possible, they meet to share meals, exchange stories, and discuss how their communities are changing. Their friendship becomes a symbol of the new Kumandra because none of them would have naturally met under the old system of separation. Boon's energetic personality often clashes with Tong's quieter nature, while Raya tries to keep both of them focused when their conversations become chaotic. Sisu enjoys these gatherings because they remind her of the dragons she lost. She cannot bring her siblings back, but seeing humans form bonds across regional boundaries gives meaning to the sacrifice they made long ago. Chief Benja eventually asks Raya to accompany him to another gathering of regional leaders. This time, the atmosphere is completely different from the meeting that ended in disaster years earlier. People arrive without hidden weapons or suspicious expressions, and food is shared openly between representatives. Raya remembers standing in the same kind of gathering as a child and watching everything collapse. The contrast is emotional because she knows how much pain existed between those two moments. Benja tells her that this is what he always hoped to see. Raya smiles and realizes that the future of Kumandra will not be perfect, but it can be better than the past because people now understand what they stand to lose if they allow fear to return. The five regions gradually begin recognizing that their differences can actually strengthen Kumandra. Fang's technology, Spine's strength, Talon's waterways, Tail's survival knowledge, and Heart's traditions each provide something valuable. Instead of competing over which region is superior, people begin combining their skills. New projects are created to improve travel, communication, agriculture, and protection across the entire land. Raya sees these developments as proof that unity does not require abandoning individuality. The regions remain proud of their identities, but they no longer believe those identities must exist at the expense of others. Kumandra becomes stronger precisely because its people are learning how to contribute their different abilities toward shared goals. The story of Raya and Sisu eventually becomes known throughout Kumandra as an example of how trust can overcome fear. Children hear about the warrior who traveled across the divided lands searching for the last dragon and eventually discovered that the greatest power was not hidden inside the gem. Adults remember the sacrifices made during the final confrontation and teach younger generations why cooperation matters. Raya does not mind that the story becomes larger than the truth. She simply hopes people remember the important lesson. If they ever begin fighting again, she wants them to remember how easily division allowed the Droon to return and how much courage it took to choose trust instead. Years after the events of the crisis, Raya continues serving Kumandra in her own way. She remains a skilled warrior, but her responsibilities now include helping settle disagreements and maintaining relationships between communities. She often travels with Sisu, visiting villages where people want to hear stories about the dragons or simply meet the creature they once believed existed only in legend. Raya enjoys seeing children approach Sisu without fear. To her, their curiosity represents a future different from the one she inherited. They will grow up knowing that people from different regions can become friends and that trust is something worth protecting rather than something to avoid. The memory of Chief Penja's original gathering remains important to Raya because it reminds her how fragile peace can be. She knows that Kumandra's new unity should never be taken for granted. Every generation will face disagreements, and some people will always try to use fear to gain power. The difference is that the people now have a shared history, reminding them what happens when they allow suspicion to replace communication. Raya hopes that future leaders will remember the lessons of the past and choose dialogue before conflict. She does not expect perfection from anyone. She only expects them to keep trying. Because trust grows through repeated choices and can disappear just as quickly when people stop caring for it. As another peaceful evening settles over Kumandra, Raya stands beside Sisu and watches the lights of different communities shining across the landscape. The regions that once seemed separated forever are now connected by roads, friendships, trade, and shared celebrations. The world is still recovering, but there is a sense of possibility that did not exist when Raya was a child. She remembers the fear she once carried and realizes that it no longer defines her. Her father is alive, her friends are beside her, and the people of Kumandra are working toward a common future. The dragon gem remains a symbol of that unity, but the real protection comes from the trust people have learned to place in one another. Years after the defeat of the Droon, Kumandra continues changing in ways that would have seemed impossible during Raya's childhood. The five regions remain proud of their individual traditions, but their people now travel between territories more freely and cooperate on projects that benefit everyone. Roads connect communities that once avoided one another. Merchants exchange goods without fear, and leaders regularly meet to resolve disagreements before they become conflicts. Raya watches these changes with quiet satisfaction because she remembers how divided the world once was. The unity surrounding her is not perfect, but it is real. Every peaceful meeting, shared meal, and new friendship represents another step away from the fear that once nearly destroyed humanity. Raya continues traveling throughout Kumandra with Sisu, visiting communities that are still rebuilding and helping whenever her skills are needed. Sisu remains fascinated by everything she encounters, often asking questions about customs that have changed during the years she was hidden away. Raya enjoys watching her discover the modern world because it reminds her that the future does not have to be controlled by the mistakes of the past. Together, they meet children who have grown up hearing stories about the dragons and the drone. Some children are frightened by the old stories, while others are fascinated by them. Raya always encourages them to remember both the danger and the lesson that came from surviving it. Chief Benja continues supporting the leaders of the five regions as they establish stronger relationships. His belief in cooperation has become widely respected, although he knows that peace requires constant effort. He often reminds Raya that unity is not something achieved once and then permanently secured. People will disagree, misunderstand one another, and sometimes become afraid. What matters is how they respond when those problems appear. Raya understands this better than anyone because her own journey began with a broken friendship and years of anger. She now helps her father during important meetings, offering a perspective shaped by her experiences with every region. Together, they encourage leaders to solve problems through communication rather than allowing suspicion to grow. Namari becomes one of Fang's strongest advocates for cooperation, even though the region still contains people who remember the old divisions. She works alongside her mother to expand trade and communication with the other territories, slowly proving that opening Fang does not make it weaker. Some citizens remain suspicious of her decisions, but Namari understands that changing people's minds takes time. She does not demand immediate trust because she knows she once struggled with the same fears. Instead, she allows her actions to speak for her. Every successful partnership gives Fang another reason to continue cooperating. Raya supports Namari whenever possible, and their friendship becomes a reminder that even relationships damaged by betrayal can eventually be rebuilt. The bond between Raya and Namari remains different from the friendship they shared as children. They are older now and understand that their past cannot simply be erased. They have both made mistakes and both have experienced the consequences of allowing fear to control their decisions. Instead of pretending that nothing happened, they openly acknowledge the pain between them. This honesty makes their friendship stronger because neither has to hide uncomfortable memories. When disagreements arise, they talk through them instead of immediately assuming betrayal. Raya appreciates how much Namari has changed, while Namari respects the fact that Raya still carries scars from the past. Their relationship becomes one of the strongest examples of trust returning after being broken. Boon's restaurant grows into one of the most popular meeting places in Kumandra. Travelers from every region visit to taste food they might never have experienced before and to meet people they would once have considered strangers. Boone takes pride in creating an atmosphere where everyone feels welcome. He often tells exaggerated stories about his adventures with Raya and Sisu, making himself sound slightly more heroic than he actually was. Raya pretends to be annoyed whenever she hears him exaggerate, while Tong quietly laughs at the stories. Sisu enjoys every version of the tale. Boone's restaurant becomes a symbol of the new Kumandra because it proves that people can share a table even when their ancestors once stood on opposite sides. Tong also becomes an important figure within Spine, helping younger warriors understand that strength should be used to protect communities rather than intimidate them. His experience of losing everyone he loved during the Drune crisis gives him a unique understanding of loneliness. He encourages people to support one another and refuses to allow anyone in his community to believe they must face hardship alone. Tong remains physically powerful, but those who know him best recognize his gentleness as his greatest quality. Children often approach him without fear because they know he will help them. His friendship with Raya remains strong, and whenever they meet, they remember how unlikely it once seemed that people from their different regions would ever become close friends. Sisu continues telling the people of Kumandra about her siblings and the sacrifice they made to save humanity. She never presents herself as the most important dragon because she knows that the victory belonged to all of them. Her stories help people understand that the dragon gem was created through cooperation between siblings who trusted one another completely. This message becomes especially important as new generations grow up without personal memories of the drone. Raya worries that people might eventually forget how dangerous division can become, so she encourages Sisu to continue sharing the history. The stories preserve the memory of the past while also reminding everyone that trust must be practiced rather than simply celebrated. Raya begins training a new generation of warriors who will eventually protect Kumandra. Her lessons focus on discipline, awareness, and responsibility. But she also teaches something her younger self never understood. She tells them that not every problem can be solved with a sword, and that the strongest warrior is sometimes the person who knows when to lower a weapon. Some students are surprised by this philosophy because they grew up hearing stories about ancient conflicts between the regions. Raya explains that fighting may be necessary when people are in immediate danger, but cooperation should always be attempted first. Her students gradually understand that her greatest victory was not defeating an enemy but learning how to trust others. The restored communities continue discovering objects and records that survived the drone crisis. Historians begin studying the old civilizations of Kumandra and comparing what they find with the stories passed down through generations. Some details of the dragon legends prove inaccurate, while other discoveries reveal just how much had been forgotten. Raya takes interest in this work because she understands how dangerous it can be when history is distorted. The people of Kumandra once inherited incomplete stories that encourage suspicion between regions. Now scholars have an opportunity to create a more complete record. Raya hopes future generations will learn the truth about the divisions that nearly destroyed them and understand that history should teach people rather than trap them. The five regions also begin cooperating on protection against future supernatural or natural threats. Nobody expects another drone crisis to appear, but the experience has taught everyone that preparation matters. Joint patrols are established in areas where different territories meet, and emergency plans are created so communities can help one another quickly. Raya supports these changes because she knows that unity must exist in practical ways, not just through speeches and celebrations. When people share information and resources before a disaster happens, they become less vulnerable when something unexpected occurs. The old system of isolation is gradually replaced by a network of communities that understand their survival is connected. Despite the progress, Raya occasionally encounters people who still distrust the other regions. Some families lost loved ones during old conflicts and find forgiveness difficult. Raya never dismisses their pain because she understands how difficult it was for her to let go of her own anger toward Namari. Instead, she listens and explains that forgiveness does not mean forgetting what happened. It means refusing to allow the past to control every decision about the future. Some people accept her message immediately, while others need more time. Raya is patient because she knows trust cannot be created through force. The new Kumandra must be built by millions of individual choices, not by one leader demanding that everyone suddenly feel united. Namari faces similar resistance inside Fang, particularly from older citizens who remember the years when the region remained isolated. She works carefully to show that cooperation does not threaten Fang's identity. Traditional celebrations continue, local customs remain important, and the people retain pride in their homeland. The difference is that they now welcome visitors and share resources when necessary. Namari often explains that being part of Kumandra does not require Fang to become less Fang. It means recognizing that strength can come from relationships as well as walls. Her leadership becomes increasingly respected because she does not try to erase the past. Instead, she uses what happened to create a safer future for the people she once feared losing. Raya occasionally returns to Heart with her father and walks through the places where the old tragedy began. The area has been rebuilt, but she can still remember exactly how everything looked on the day the gem was broken. These visits are difficult, yet they no longer fill her with the same anger. She can remember the pain without becoming trapped inside it. Chief Benja notices this change and understands that his daughter has finally found peace with the past. Raya tells him that she used to think saving him would erase everything that happened. Now she realizes that healing does not erase memories. It means being able to remember painful moments while still choosing to live fully afterward. Sisu often accompanies Raya during these visits and reminds her that the dragon's sacrifice gave humanity a second chance. Raya understands that second chances carry responsibility. Kumandra cannot simply return to the way things were before the drone. The people must use their survival to create something better. Sisu believes this is exactly what the dragons would have wanted. Their sacrifice was not meant to preserve an unchanged world. It was meant to give humans an opportunity to choose their own future. Raya takes that responsibility seriously and works with the other leaders to make sure the lessons of the past remain part of everyday life rather than becoming forgotten stories. The friendship between Raya, Sisu, Boon, Tong, and Namari remains one of the strongest connections created by the crisis. They come from completely different backgrounds, yet their shared experience has given them a bond that distance cannot easily weaken. They continue visiting one another and helping whenever one region faces a serious problem. Their meetings are often filled with laughter, disagreements, and stories about the journey that changed all of their lives. Raya sometimes jokes that she never expected to end up with such a strange group of friends. Sisu always responds that the strangest friendships are sometimes the most important because they prove that differences do not have to prevent people from caring about one another. As the years pass, children who were born after the drone crisis begin growing up in a very different Kumandra. They learn about the 5 regions without being taught to fear them. They visit markets where merchants from different lands trade openly and attend celebrations where people share food and music across cultural boundaries. Raya sees these children as the greatest evidence that the world has changed. They do not understand why the regions were once enemies, just as she once struggled to understand why her father's dream seemed impossible. Their innocence gives her hope that the cycle of fear may finally be broken. The future generation may not have to spend years unlearning hatred because they will grow up knowing cooperation as normal. Chief Benja eventually steps back from some of his responsibilities, allowing younger leaders to take greater control of Kumandra's future. He trusts them because he knows that unity cannot depend forever on one person. Raya also accepts that her role will eventually change. She wants the next generation to become capable of protecting the peace without depending entirely on her or the people who survived the original crisis. She encourages young leaders to question old assumptions and listen to communities they do not understand. Her father's example taught her that leadership means believing in people, even when they have not yet learned to believe in themselves. She hopes the next generation will carry that belief forward. The dragon gem remains protected in heart, but its meaning has changed. It is no longer viewed simply as an object that one region must guard against everyone else. Representatives from all 5 regions participate in protecting it, recognizing that its power belongs to the entire world rather than a single community. Raya believes this arrangement is important because the gem once became a symbol of division when people fought over who should control it. Now it represents shared responsibility. Sisu occasionally visits the gem and remembers her siblings, while Raya sees it as a reminder of the journey that changed her life. Both understand that its greatest power comes from what it represents rather than what it can physically do. One evening, Raya and Sisu travel to a hill overlooking several regions of Kumandra. From the high ground, they can see lights from different communities shining across the landscape. Raya remembers the world she knew as a child, when the regions were separated by suspicion and people rarely traveled beyond their own borders. The contrast is almost impossible to believe. Sisu asks whether Raya thinks her father would be proud of what Kumandra has become. Raya smiles and says that he would probably tell her there is still more work to do. Sisu laughs because she knows that Benja's dream was never about reaching a perfect ending. It was about continuing to believe in unity. Raya understands that peace will never mean the complete absence of conflict. People will disagree, leaders will make mistakes, and old fears may occasionally return. What matters is that Kumandra now has a different way of responding. Instead of immediately reaching for weapons, people can talk. Instead of closing borders, they can ask for help. Instead of assuming betrayal, they can give one another a chance to explain. These changes may seem small, but together they create a powerful difference. Raya knows this because she once stood on the opposite side of those choices. She spent years believing that isolation was protection, only to discover that the greatest protection came from the people willing to stand beside her. As the evening grows darker, Sisu and Raya begin walking back toward Heart. Their journey through Kumandra has become almost peaceful now, but Raya still carries her sword because she knows responsibility does not disappear simply because the world is safer. She also carries the lessons of everyone she met along the way. Boone taught her the value of friendship. Tong taught her that strength can exist alongside gentleness. Namari taught her that broken trust can sometimes be repaired. And Sisu taught her that hope is worth protecting. Chief Benja taught her the foundation beneath all of those lessons. People are stronger when they choose to stand together. The story of Kumandra, therefore, becomes more than a tale about dragons, magic, and an ancient threat. It becomes the story of people learning that fear can divide them while trust can reunite them. Raya's greatest achievement is not simply that she helped defeat the Drone or restore her father. She helped change the way people understood one another. The regions that once viewed each other as enemies now recognize that their futures are connected. The people who once believed trust was dangerous now understand that refusing to trust can be even more dangerous. That lesson becomes part of the foundation upon which the next generation builds its world. Raya eventually returns to Heart and stands beside the dragon gem as evening settles over the restored kingdom. She thinks about the girl she once was, carrying a sword and believing she had to solve every problem alone. She remembers the years of searching, the friendships she never expected to make, the mistakes she had to forgive, and the moment she finally chose to trust Namari. Every part of the journey led to this peaceful moment. Raya knows there will always be challenges ahead, but she no longer fears them in the same way. She has learned that courage does not mean facing the world alone. It means having the courage to trust others enough to face it together. Sisu joins her as the first stars appear above Kumandra, and together they watch the lights of the 5 regions shining across the land. Somewhere beyond them, Baun is probably telling another exaggerated story. Tong is helping his community, and Namari is working to strengthen Fang's connection with the rest of Kumandra. Raya smiles because she knows they are all part of something larger than themselves. The dragons gave humanity a second chance, but the people of Kumandra decided what to do with it. Their future will not be perfect, yet it will be shared. And as long as they remember the lesson of the past, the unity they fought so hard to create can continue growing for generations to come.